nature. And I would do these meditation techniques that I just sort of visualized on my own, and I would have these out-of-body experiences where I would float over the city and would see things. And I began to do this kind of traveling and remote viewing even before my near-death experience, and it was really crystal clear. And so, I began to really question what I had been taught. And, some people were raised in religious traditions that are very rigid. I was raised in a scientific tradition that was equally rigid, and so it was interesting that the path that I took was one that where I discovered this very much on my own from some inner spiritual knowledge that was latent. And what's exciting about it is that that's why, as I begun to teach the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols to people, many people say, oh, well, I wasn't raised in a family that did this, and I don't have it. I said, yeah, but I wasn't either. And what I point out to everyone is that if you're conscious, you can be aware of awareness. And if you can become aware of pure, quiet mind in a deep, deep state, you can then escape the boundaries of linear 3D space and 4D space-time and see distant places and travel to other star systems and see other dimensions and learn knowledge from the level of Ritambara Pragya, which is the Sanskrit term, the Vedic term for this level of consciousness where all knowledge is contained. And this is such an exciting bit of information for people, because most people think that you have to lay around on a bed of nails, for like 40 years and then come out of a cave as a grizzled old man before you. I said, no. I mean, this is something that is the birthright of every single person on the planet, and importantly, all about our subject of ETs and other dimensions, of all the interstellar civilizations, that every sentient being in the cosmos has what's common with us is the universality of mind and consciousness. And when you realize that that is the foundation, it really is the spiritual foundation for everything we're doing with the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative to make contact, is that it's the realization that the light of consciousness, the mind itself, is a singularity, as Erwin Schrödinger, the father of modern quantum physics, said, and that the conscious mind itself is transcendental and transpersonal, and is a singularity, that the mind whereby every single person is awake is, in fact, one, and there's never separation. And the native peoples really understand this concept of, shall we use the term, divine unity or profound oneness so well. And one of the things I remember reading many years ago is the native peoples in many in South America and North America were kind of appalled at Western civilization with the concept of separateness, and that we're so separate and everything is separated, when in reality we never are. And in many of these more ancient cultures, that was just a way of living, like the dream time of the Aboriginals of Australia, where it was just part of their life that they would go into the dream state and they would converse with people in remote locations, and they would have precognition during the dream, and this was just part of the culture. It was part of their reality and was experienced in a very common way, not just by shamans and what have you, but by everyone. And I think that this is what's exciting. I think in the coming era that we're entering into, this is going to be the central science, and the central area of study is the study of consciousness and higher states of consciousness. Even on the level of, if you look at Rupert Sheldrake's work in morphogenic fields, that as people begin to do something, whatever it is, a skill that's learned, it's the 100th monkey effect, that non-locally in remote places, people who have no connection to those to that person in terms of a linear connection will begin to have the same ideas or to have a similar pattern of thought or behavior. And this has been studied also with large groups of people meditating and praying, where it has an effect on an entire population of people. And so it's not as if our own internal existence is separate from the external. This duality is actually Maya. That's the illusion. The reality is that the entirety of the cosmos and the entire universe, even the external universe, is folded within this architecture and structure of the conscious mind that is within every individual. And that means that every individual is a conscious quantum hologram. So if you understand what a hologram is, if you take a hologram of, say, Marilyn Monroe with her skirt blowing up, I mean, it's just a graphic image. Everyone knows what it is. And if you were to take a little teeny part of that hologram, say the edge of her skirt, you would be able to go in it and you would have the entirety of Marilyn Monroe, that whole image, and it's within. Well, the whole universe is a conscious quantum hologram, and each individual that is a conscious being, which is all of us, has the entirety of the cosmos floated within us. And that's why when individuals go into deep meditation to make peaceful contact with these other civilizations from other star systems, it has an enormous effect way beyond what people can realize. And for people who are hearing this for the first time, well, on our website there's a link to a contact app that you can put on your iPhone or smartphone. And we now have thousands of people who are doing this, and there's a meditation in there. All the protocols are in this app. It will turn your phone into a magnetometer that will pick up the changes in the magnetic field as other life forms or ET craft approach. It is an amazing app, actually, and it's there. And what we're finding is that people who will take this app and just use it. I mean, people who are just everyday, ordinary people all over the world, we're getting these reports of amazing contact they're having. Why? Because the universality of consciousness is that it's universal, and the mind that is within each of us is a singularity. And when you practice these deep meditation protocols and then intend to make peaceful contact, there is a hunger, an eagerness by these interstellar civilizations that have been around since the beginning of time, who have been around, some of them, I call them the guardians of life on Earth, who have been around watching and seeing the Earth develop and protecting the Earth. They are so eager for humans to awaken to that capability that is why they will appear. And, of course, some people have experiences with purely spiritual beings that aren't 3D physical, but I'm now referring to extraterrestrial civilizations that have physical worlds, physical bodies, and physical spacecraft. But in order to travel through interstellar distances, they use technologies and consciousness to drop out of 3D and to go through other dimensions, much like a lucid flying dream. And this is why so many people have experiences in the meditative and sleep state with ETs. And if you learn how to do the meditation and do the remote viewing, it will open that up because interstellar civilizations, the ones that have developed even a few thousand years past where we are, they routinely have that capability that interfaces not just with their consciousness but also with their technologies. And I've called this consciousness-assisted technology, but they also have technology-assisted consciousness, where a technological system assists in the consciousness and the projection of consciousness, or even the so-called astral body of light, which is, if you go to our website, you'll see a picture on the CE5 part of SiriusDisclosure.com. You'll see a picture of this being floating in the desert outside our circle in Joshua Tree a couple years ago. And his name is Bijou, and he's from Andromeda Galaxy. And it's an amazing photograph. And it was first seen as an orb. It was about the size of a grapefruit, a sphere, floating in the desert during one of our breaks. And then I was down in the desert away from the group with just maybe 5 or 10 people. And then I came and saw this, and several people saw it. And it floated beside my right shoulder for just a short distance and vanished. And then I went back to the whole group, and I said, oh, God, we have to get back together. But everybody was talking, and it was at a break where people were getting, something to drink and eat. And one of our team members, Raven, then heard, along with myself and several other people, a whole little group of extraterrestrial biological life forms talking. I mean, literally you could hear them like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And most people heard females, but I heard also a male voice in there. And I said, no, there's 4 of them, and one of them's a male. And so Raven connected with her mind, her consciousness, and asked permission to take their photograph, even though they were dematerialized, but you could hear them talking. Now, this gets into the whole question of transdimensional science and how ETs can appear, disappear, appear partially in this dimension, partially not. It's a fascinating area of study, which is really what the main focus that I'm trying to bring to people is, so they understand there's a whole science to this, but there's an experiential level of it, and that you really have to master to understand what's going on when you make contact. But at that moment, she just asked permission and took a photograph, and I think she had it set so the lens was open 3 or 4 seconds. And in the frame was this male that was floating just outside where our chairs were, and turned and waved at her and smiled. And it's this amazing, enigmatic. It almost looks like a hologram, but it's not. It's actually the etheric and astral energy being electronically teleported out of that orb. And you can see the orb is to the left over by a bush that lights up a bush, and there's a cone of light that lights up the chairs, and he's sort of being held in this energy field. And this is in the photograph. And what I point out to people is that they can be around us, and the only thing we saw with our physical eyes was the sphere. But within the sphere of light was the entire spacecraft and all its occupants. This is the key point. But all that could be seen in this dimension, as it sort of folded in, was this grapefruit-sized sphere. And then we heard the sound of, many people heard the sound of these beings talking. And then she took the photograph. So this kind of contact experience is astonishing. Now, a lot of people say, well, why don't they just fully materialize? Well, they have done that, and, of course, so it'd be very brief, and then usually within 1 or 2 minutes, there's a jet fighter that comes in over us. Actually, 2 years ago when we were in England, we're getting ready to go to the crop circles in a couple weeks. We were up on this hill in England, and we had one of these massive spheres appear, and everyone saw it. And within moments, there was a helicopter with no lights on, and I mean completely blackened, which is against the law in any country. It had no navigation lights, no lights. But that came over us less than 100 feet, 50 to 100 feet over us, and did this several times because it had picked up. So what I tell people is that the actual ET civilizations are very eager to make contact, but it may happen enigmatically and in ways that you don't expect. People look at a lot of science fiction movies, and they need to realize that the real ET phenomenon is something much more nuanced and amazing, actually, and conscious, and that it's not happening within the vacuum of a world that's completely healed. It's happening within the reality of Earth, which is, of course, a very heavily armed camp. So all that has to get factored into it. But the key to having a successful, deeply spiritual contact experience, in however way it manifests, is understanding the nature and the true spiritual nature of the mind and conscious being within all of us. And when a group does it, it becomes very powerful because the studies that have been done in consciousness studies is that when you have, say, one person intending with their awareness to affect a random number generator or something, it has a certain effect. But if you have two people who love each other, where there's a heart connection like you're talking about, Hillary, the effect is actually exponentially greater, not just arithmetically greater. And so there's this effect that is beyond space-time linearity that's very powerful when more than one person is doing this with a pure heart in a peaceful way with the right ethical intentions, and it has an amazing effect. Most people don't understand that whatever you may hear about on CNN that, say, the NSA has or the intelligence community has is usually between 20 and 50 years older than what's actually operating in what are called unacknowledged special access projects, which we go into in the film Sirius. And those of you, by the way, who don't have it, you can now, it's in stock. You can get it in both NTSC and PAL. You can order it at SiriusDisclosure.com. But I think you can also see it online on video on demand there. But I think that most people don't understand, for example, that in 1974, a man that I knew personally who's since passed away, he had an electronics company, and he had invented very high-end electronics that would pick up what he called neutrino light, but very subtle light, almost on the level of the astral. And the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, Google it, it's the super secret spy agency that runs all the classified satellites, seized the technology. He told me this personally, and I have a witness to this, by the way. They seized the technology, and this is 40 years ago, and put it on their satellite so that they could pick up ET craft even when they weren't in this dimension but were about to materialize so that they could lock onto them. So that was, now you can imagine how many iterations of technological evolution have happened since 1974. It's almost 40 years in a classified project that has, as Donald Rumsfeld said, $2.3 trillion that is unaccounted for in the Department of Defense alone, not to mention the intelligence community, that have gone into these so-called black projects. So what I always tell people, whatever you think the capabilities are within classified human projects, it's 1,000 times more developed. However, one of the things that they cannot do anything about is people coming together openly, doing disclosure, and also making contact and consciousness. Because, yes, I'm one person that can be a high-value target. I hate to use that term, but you know, there are 7 billion people on the planet, and now there are thousands of teams out there doing the CE5 contact protocols, and many more thousands of people who are just by themselves doing it. That they can't handle. And so one of the things I tell people is that even from that point of view, looking at morphogenic field analysis from Rupert Sheldrake and others, looking at non-local consciousness, looking at how change happens, whether it was the civil rights era, whether it was the women's suffrage movement, whether it was the emergence of democracies around the world, whether it was the Arab Spring, whether it was a Stonewall and the evolution of rights for gay and lesbian people, whether it all is about people coming together, making that change happen. Well, the big change that we have to make happen is the evolution of our planet from a world of division to a world of peace and oneness, where we join then and link up to all these other civilizations that are out there in the cosmos. And my understanding is that in the next few hundred years, the Earth and humanity is going to be completely integrated and will become in a state of universal oneness with all these other civilizations, but openly. And that has to start somewhere. It doesn't happen instantly, but it has to start somewhere. And so that's what's really happening with the CE5 initiative and with what we're doing with disclosure and contact. And the foundation of it, however, is not only the operational paradigm is the understanding and practice of mindfulness and consciousness and pure-heartedness and intent. But the philosophical underpinning is also that, because once you understand that, I mean, look how different someone from China is from an Italian, or, you know, someone in the Congo may be from a Norwegian. Well, now multiply that a millionfold in diversity throughout the cosmos. But what is common amongst all these intelligences? It's the capacity to be sentient, to be awake, to be conscious, to be a spiritual being. That is universal. And that's why I keep coming back to this very concept of the oneness of mind and this unbounded absolute field of pure consciousness. That is the root foundation of not only operationally being able to make contact in remote view in terms of practice, but in terms of understanding other cultures, because then the multiplicity is there. It's not like multiplicity and diversity is going to go away. It's wonderful, but it's not something that becomes a point of conflict. It becomes a point of celebration because you see the commonality. There's this oneness that is a thread, a golden thread that weaves all life together, and that is the state of mind, of spirituality, of this pure state of consciousness that is really oneness, and the highest expression of love is oneness, because if you love someone, you want to be one with them. You want to be with them. So there are all these deep meanings to what we're doing in contact that then expresses itself into what we're doing socially, culturally, and otherwise, and technologically. One of the interesting points that I'm going to be making to this group of world leaders that I'm meeting with is going to be the technologies that we have today to provide the deep energy that we run on are all explosive, violent technologies. Burning coal, burning oil, Look at the town in Quebec that's been immolated, just burned up by those petroleum cars crashing into it the other night in Quebec. It's an and even nuclear power is very destructive. So the consciousness of the Kali Yuga of division and separation is manifested even through our technology, whereas the technologies that are based on zero-point energy and quantum vacuum is this state of oneness, and it's nonviolent. It's like nonviolent change in the civil rights era. It's nonviolent energy generation so that you're not destroying the atmosphere, you're not destroying the rivers and the land in order to generate energy. And, of course, these technologies began to be discovered back in the 1800s and early 1900s. They just have been ruthlessly suppressed because of big money power issues. But it is an expression of our consciousness that we still have oil and gas and coal and nuclear power. And so in reality, yes, it's a technological and it's a physical thing, but it's an outward expression of our state collectively on a spiritual level. And many people aren't comfortable when they hear that because nobody wants to really own that collectively, but it's just the truth. And as soon as we awaken, we can decide, oh, well, we can support a project to bring out the kinds of technologies that have been around that have been confiscated by a very small number of people who have abused their power. But if enough people get behind the idea that we can change that, it will change. Now, it may not be instant, but it will happen. But we have to intend it. But we have to intend it from a place of a higher consciousness. You know, I tell people you're basically in a 24-hour training program because even at night I encourage people to keep a dream journal and to intend to be awake within the dream and to learn and to see. And it does carry over. Some of the most amazing experiences that the group will be in the lucid dream state. And it's something that most people say, oh, well, I go to sleep and it's just nothing there. But in reality, most cultures have acknowledged the profound nature of what can happen in the awake lucid dream, and that you can actually become aware of things while you're in the dream and begin to travel and learn and explore even in that state, just like you can in the meditative state. So it becomes a seamless understanding that consciousness and your own conscious reality is plugged into this unbounded aspect of mind, and the exploration is infinite. And we basically limit ourselves. I tell people we put ourselves in our own cages and lock it. We have the key to unlock it, and we have to intend to do it. Anything someone like you and I can do is sort of point the way, but ultimately every individual has the key to unlocking the freedom within their own soul, and that's what everyone has to accept responsibility for, and then come together. This is where that individual becomes the social and cultural to make the change real in the material world, where the physical world is benefited from that realization, and where you get the courage, spiritual courage, to make the change happen in a nonviolent way, but in a way that is spiritually the Shambhala warrior sort of way, where you're not a warrior in the violent sense, but you're not going to be intimidated by people who want to drag the world back into a period of division, separation, and warfare. And I think going forward, this is one of the biggest challenges we're going to have, because it's very, very easy to play on people's fears and hatreds, and this is, of course, demagogues have always done that in organized religion and political systems. And the big risk of the coming decade or so is, as people become more and more aware that there's intelligent life out there, that we not take, one racial or tribal or national competition and division, or all the different things that have divided humanity over the thousands of years of this era of division and separation, that we not then extrapolate that into this new era of enlightenment, where we then say, oh, well, now we have to view these other civilizations in an us versus them way, because this is not progress to go from international war and intertribal war and interspecies to then go to interplanetary war. It's very easy to play on that proclivity within the human cultural, social construct, because that's been the collective experience for so long in our society of, one tribe or one religion or one nationality or one economic philosophy competing with another, and it to the point of it being violent warfare. And so there are people who, of course, would benefit from that kind of conflict being expanded into space. And they are very good at manipulating that scenario. And what we have to do is say there's another path, when we have to choose the path of universal peace. And that is something, it is a conscious choice we have to make.
Of a Navy contract vessel that was in the South Pacific in '63. Jacques Vallée had the story, but he didn't have the source. It was a third-hand story for him, where we were testing the, I think they were the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missiles. We were firing them downstream in the South Atlantic, and this captain who contacted me was on a ship that was retrieving them after a test fire. Now, these were not hot. They didn't have nuclear weapons on them. They were trying to get the missile to be accurate. But the missiles kept missing their mark, and they knew there was some kind of a subtle electromagnetic thing happening. And there was always an ET craft around. And they got these on radar. So one night, his radar guy, they had a new, I think it was RCA radar system, and it was sweeping around, and they picked up a craft. And so the captain was called, came up, they got it. He called the command center, and they got it on radar. Unfortunately, they then hit it with some kind of electronic weapon or something. And the thing blew up. There was an explosion in the sky, and it fell straight down into the water, this UFO. And the next morning, his ship was vectored into the point of impact. And they couldn't find the ship, but there was about a 6-foot square pod that had ejected, that had 4 of the ET beings in it. And this guy was a salt-of-the-earth Navy guy, and he said, well, they were handsome little men, but their skin was the color of a Sicilian. I never forget him saying that. Sicilian. Okay. And bronze-colored, no hair, no pinna, which is the pinna is the flap, the monkey ears we have. They just have openings. Fine lips, a sort of small nose. And just like the man that contacted me from Skunk Works at Lockheed about the astral projection experience, this person contacted me to find out something that had bugged him. It stuck in his mind and bothered him for 40 years. And I said, well, what is it? He says, well, we got him out of this thing, this pod. They were ordered to put him in the ship's freezer till a nuclear submarine came along and took them, and they were all threatened with death if they talked about this. He says these little men were in sort of these metallicized fabric. It was almost metal, soft metal-like fabric, one-piece suits. I said, yeah, like a onesie. But it didn't have any buttons or zippers. And he said, how could they have gotten in them? And I said, this is why you're calling me? And it was. This was exactly why he was calling me. And I said, well, I don't know if you're going to like my answer. And he said, well, tell me. I know those damn things, you could have to cut them off, but we couldn't even cut them. I said, well, the way that that suit is made, they just stand into an energy field that has a resonant, and it materializes around them. Like 3D printing, but like a 3D, zip. So there are no, and it comes off the same way. It dematerializes off and materializes on. But I said, did you notice anything about this thing that they were in, that was floating? He said, yeah, it had no pieces. I said the same thing. So I call this sort of a infra-ultrasonic manufacturing, where if you imagine going beyond the speed of light, speed of electrons, beyond the zero-point energy field, and creating sort of a architectural blueprint of a spacecraft that's in that dimension, like an astral, like your astral body, and have that resonate, and it comes into this dimension in toto. So it recruits the atoms, the molecules, the structures, not by digging them up and smelting them and banging them and doing rivets like we do on an airplane, but and I call this extraterrestrial manufacturing 101 that I'm sharing with you. So that's why these spacecraft, the guys who I know who've gone to ones that have retrieved them, they're seamless. Now, if you see one that has rivets and seams and parts of it, that's Lockheed and Northrop's and Boeing's anti-gravity stuff. But these, the ET ones, are completely seamless, and the light coming from them is so amazing, it's so pure, you never quite forget it, because the light is coming from a source and materials that aren't manufacturable. You couldn't even manufacture something that pure in space. And there was a part of a craft that they got in Brazil, and I forget, it had magnesium and some other stuff in it, but the elements that were in it were so pure that even in the vacuum of space we could not manufacture it. And no one understood how they could be doing this. I said, because they're not going to some asteroid or planet and digging up stuff out of the earth and smelting it and melting it and then putting it together. They're creating a field, and it resonates and then comes in from that transdimensional, virtual, near astral, I call it, the near astral. And it then pops as a totality into 3D. Make sense? Which, if you study the literature of the craft that have been retrieved and even the clothing on these beings, they're consistently this same report. Now, why is that important? Because it means that when you're out under the stars and you see something, and if it seems it's too beautiful to be real, it looks like a jewel. We were once in Colorado, and there was an object. It looked like it was a crystalline jewel in the sky. And it was there for a number of minutes, and you couldn't even, it was painful. It was so beautiful. And then there was a fighter jet was vectored in, and the thing popped and began to go off, looked exactly like a 737. Everyone saw it. So, but what's fascinating is the purity of the light and the quality of it. And then there's one more thing. These craft are imbued at the level of nanobiotechnology. You know what that is, where they're actually living and they're conscious. So the craft itself has the consciousness of the occupants, and often it's the chief pilot or the person who's actually directing it, which is usually they will either touch it and think, and they'll go. All right? But the craft itself is not just like a piece of machinery. It's actually living. And there have been more than one military guy I've interviewed who have been on retrieval missions when they get there, and the craft has been injured. I call it injured because it's organic. And there'll be a crack, and it'll be trying to heal. Like if you did a cut and did a time lapse of a healing of a wound on skin, it's doing this kind of thing, trying to fix itself. And so the craft themselves are nanobiotechnology at the level where they then can subsume or take on the awareness of the occupants. And that's how they operate. So many times people have an experience with a UFO, but they'll feel that the UFO itself was communicating or was conscious. I say, well, it is. That it was like this living, organic, conscious thing. And many times people will dismiss it, and I'll go, no, thousands of people have had the same experience. And it's because it is. It is a living, conscious nanobiotechnology at the level that it can then take on the awareness of the occupant or the occupants. But usually it's the main occupant who's the anthropocentrically projecting here, captain or the person in charge. Does that make sense to people? So the really important thing to know, because if you're out into the stars, I remember last year, just before I had to take this trip to Australia, and I was laying on the beach, and I was with a friend, and it was beautiful. You could see the whole Milky Way galaxy on the outer. I was on the Outer Banks, and I was out there, and we were talking about this stuff. And there's someone who had never seen one of these objects, And suddenly, in the Milky Way, an object about that big at arm's length, which is huge, it was pretty close and pretty big, materialized, and it was this beautiful kind of crimson ruby red, but it was like it was living. It was like this thing that was living, and it moved and went the whole distance of the Milky Way galaxy. It wasn't an instantaneous thing. It was there for a little while. I don't know if anyone else on Earth saw it, but we saw it. We were looking straight up. And it was like it was alive. The sky was alive. The object was alive. And I realized it was going right in the direction of Australia, which a few days later, I was wheels up to Australia. So, and I think it was, I told my wife, I said, I think they were telling me, you know, bon voyage, and we'll be with you there. So it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And it can happen that easily and that quickly. When I started on this, the core project was this, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Making Contact. I got dragged kicking and screaming into the Disclosure Project, which started as Project Starlight, where I was doing briefings for the president, CI director, and folks like that, because I was told by some folks that you know, you can do this, but there's all this stuff that has to get fixed, because there were tragedies of history in the post-World War II era that should have never happened. And we also have to fix that. So there are 3 legs of the program that I'm running. One is the CE5 initiative, CSETI, Interstellar Contact. The other is Disclosure Project, and the other is bringing out the technologies to basically transform the planet physically. All right, so that evolved, but the one unfolded the other. The reason the intelligence community got interested in what we were doing is that they realized we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact. And the friendlies then came to me and said, would you please try to fix this? And then someone asked me to come up and brief the CIA director, and then this person, and then the president was scared to death, and you know, they hit a scalar weapon that knocked down Marine One, that was President Clinton's helicopter. It lifts up in the White House, and the shot was fired across the bow. So I've been doing stuff at that level, PI, presidential intelligence, since 1993. But you know, frankly, that is not where my real passion is. My real passion is what I'm talking about today. And it's in a way sad that we're having this generation, those of us between the ages of puberty and senility, I think everyone here, most of us, are really having to correct a problem from 50 to 100 years ago. Because remember this, high voltage, free energy, they didn't know what it was, technological systems that just generate energy, late 1800s, early 1900s, Tesla, Faraday, Maxwell. EMGs, electromagnetogravitics, where you create a high voltage at a certain resonant harmonic where you get lift, 1920s, T. Townsend Brown. So we could have had world peace, free energy, anti-gravity, no roads, no pollution, no poverty, and a just and peaceful civilization around the time of my grandparents and great-grandparents. All right? But it is still, even though this is my passion, it's also an act of tremendous compassion to fix that problem. Because it doesn't, if everyone's running around enlightened and remote viewing, but we're cannibalizing the planet and destroying it, that's pretty stupid too. So this is all part and parcel of an endeavor. I just want you to understand that. And we're at a point where we got to make it happen. Because, you know, the Earth, the Gaia, is a conscious living entity. Literally, it's female. She's female. It's living, and it has its consciousness. Not human. Don't anthropomorphically project. But it's a conscious living being. And this was really made clear to me in 1990 when I had a contact experience and went out into deep space and actually was introduced to each planet in our solar system. It was really cool. And I realized the Earth, and there was this enormous unconditional love from the Earth that was radiating to me as I was out there. This craft was in our front yard at our house in Biltmore Forest, next to the Vanderbilt Castle in Asheville, North Carolina. And I went, and then I saw Mars. Mars is male. Venus is female. Mercury, I think, is gay. It must be and kind of androgynous. It's sort of kind of swings both ways. And who cares? Saturn. So I actually was introduced to each planet. And then I heard that within the planet, each planet, there was not only the consciousness, but a sound. And it sounds corny. It's like the music of the spheres, which is real. And I could actually hear this pure tone coming from each planet that was there. It was all these different tones. I'm not very musical. You don't want to hear me sing. That's tragic. And so as I heard each one, then I became aware that every star was conscious and was a being and awake. And then each of them had a tone. And I went into a state of consciousness where every single standing wave tone from everything in the creation blended into one pure note, one tonality. It was beautiful. Beautiful. So what I tell people about this is that the cosmos is inside your consciousness. Everything, every level, every structure. And so, let yourself be there. And when you do, then you become this sort of a child of the cosmos who's free to journey. And it's beautiful. We have our bodies, we have our individualities, but we so limit ourselves by not understanding what's really inside us. So the ETs want us to understand that, because we then become children of the cosmos and not just children of the earth. And this is what I said to the head of Army Intelligence. I said, I belong to the cosmos, a family of cosmic beings. So you don't have any jurisdiction over me. And that's what I told him. Go away. And that gives you such enormous sense of freedom. Never be intimidated. All right? Don't be. Let yourself be free. Be like a child experimenting with these technologies. Because, if you're pure-hearted and, one of the things, can I get choked up talking about this? We're at a time where we cannot limit ourselves anymore. And the future that has been forestalled for 100 years is trying to burst through. But guess what? It isn't going to happen by the ETs landing on the White House lawn. It's going to happen internally through us. And that's what the universe is waiting for. And so creating the world of our dreams, a world where we have free energy, no poverty, true justice, a peaceful civilization that becomes interstellar within a very short amount of time. That's the task at hand. And it's something we can accomplish if we just realize that there's this power within each of us to manifest and create it. But we first have to have the vision of it. If you don't have the vision, where are you going? This is why I'm trying to share this beautiful vision. And that's really what started all this, was contact. And, the whole Disclosure Project and the Orion Project was the project trying to deal with the technologies, was something that was being done.
Productions which are run by humans. For example, I have personally interviewed several military men, one of whom was an Army Ranger, who worked on special projects that were compartmented, where they were using what are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are things that look like a flying saucer or UFO that's made by Lockheed and Northrop. And they had either costumes on or used what are called PLFs, program life forms, that look like extraterrestrial beings, but they're not. They're completely man-made, to abduct or frighten people so that there would begin to be this subculture awareness of fear, and so that they can eventually ramp that up in sort of a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin scenario to stampede military and political leaders and the masses into accepting the cost of building weapons in space and getting into an interplanetary war. It's a matter of public record that General Douglas MacArthur, in his last speech to Congress, stated that, quote, World War III will be interplanetary war. So this has been in the planning stages since at least the 60s and perhaps the 50s. And so much of the imaging and so much of the subculture awareness on this is being driven by a virulent, well-funded, and high-tech human technological disinformation campaign that's designed to scare people. And what I tell people is that you've got to be able to look through this, it's like the movie The Matrix, this sort of matrix of deception and nonsense, and see what's really true. Because people, unfortunately, because of our sort of primitive brains, have this flight or fight response and tend to believe a threat because we're trained in our tribal roots to be paranoid of the unknown.
Right.
It's the roots of racism. It's the roots of hatred. And I think that this is something we have to resist because there are people who are deliberately throwing fuel on that fire in a very deceptive way. And what I've tried to explain in this new book is that I have gone into meetings with folks who are in charge of those deceptive programs and have actually acquired documents from institutes that are planning this, quote, I'm using the term used in this top secret document, stagecraft, to simulate these sort of frightening experiences. So I tell people, don't be afraid of the extraterrestrial visitors, but you should be very concerned about these other agendas, and we have to be the counterbalance to that. See, we're the children of Earth, and we alone can transform this planet and prepare it for a time of universal peace.
But people that are contactees do go onto the ships, and sometimes I know do get certain markings on their bodies or other things. And when I read that, where I went was into confusion about, okay, what's what? That's kind of where it took me. You know, okay, if you're a contactee, you pretty well know you are for the most part. But then you get in, then, you know, you start finding that you have marks on your body or different things, which I've talked about on the show before. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. And I was just a little confused about the difference there and what you were talking about.
Well, I think there are people who have had actual contact with ETs that then have one of these paramilitary groups engage them in a pseudo contact event that's an abduction. And so that's deliberately confusing. Okay. And so I think that you have to take every case on its own merits. I know when they have tried to target people in my group with that kind of experience, because we have this information, we have documents and insider whistleblower testimony about the technologies they're using to do this. We're able to discern between the false contact disinformation events, abductions, and the real contact events. But, you know, this is where knowledge really is power. Without the knowledge that there's the real thing versus this Memorex pseudo thing, you're not going to be able to distinguish it. And unfortunately, I think many people can't imagine that the human capabilities have evolved to where they have. And I point out to people that many of the capabilities that I'm describing existed by the 1950s.
Oh, yeah. We're unlimited in scope of consciousness and what we're able to do with it.
No, I'm talking about classified projects that have
Sorry.
that have weapon systems and things that look like UFOs that aren't. And
but then there's so many people that have abduction type descriptions and yet no real memories. They think it was a dream, or they wake up with marks and they don't know where they're coming from. And that's why I got confused about what you were talking about. I just wanted to clarify it for me as much as everybody else.
Well, you have to take each case on its merits, and you're not going to know is it real or is it Memorex without doing a very careful investigation. The problem is that if you go to people who deal with this issue, they don't know that there's a parallel human deception program that's extremely high-tech, and they're going to confuse the real contact with the false stuff. Why? Because they don't know the false is even possible. And I remember talking to someone who did research on this once, and when I started talking about the EG&G, which is a big high-tech electronics company that was making the implants, the involvement of E-Systems and Raytheon, the fact that Northrop and SAIC and Lockheed were building things that look absolutely like an ET craft, but they're man-made, the whole concept of stagecraft. They didn't know this whole body of evidence. And I'm going, well, you better learn about it because you're not going to be able to discern. It's like a doctor not knowing the difference between chest pain from a heart attack and chest pain from a pneumonia that's eaten into the lining of the lungs or something. So, you've got to have a differential diagnosis, and knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's very, very true. Unfortunately, most of what is out there that passes for information on this subject, which is consumed in books and videos and TV shows and what have you, is deliberate false information or disinformation designed for a certain psychological conditioning response, primarily to condition people to be afraid. And what I've said to people is, well, let's put all that aside and let's actually go out to these places and make contact with a group of people who understand the technology of contact. And we go out not only with these consciousness technologies we're using, but also with laser systems and electromagnetic sounds that we send up and all these things. And we, and see what happens and let's see if there's anything to be afraid of. And there's not. I mean, the only time we've ever had anything remotely frightening is when we've been, chased by police or had, military helicopter or aircraft come down and put searchlights on us and things like this. But nothing from the ETs has been at all worrisome. It's all been humans. So I tell people that a lot of, in a sense, this is sort of a cosmic Rorschach test. It's a sort of a cosmic mirror. The way people view this is a reflection of their own inner state of knowledge and consciousness.
And all of you know what happened at Roswell, except you don't. You don't go from interstellar distances and just lose your way in broad daylight over the desert of New Mexico and run out of gas and crash. All right, so let's pretend we have a brain. What actually happened, and this is in a document, it's on our website, from the FBI, from Guy Hotel, a field agent, to the J. Edgar Hoover, is that a special and new radar installation, euphemism, radar, electromagnetic, but it was configured to have this scalar longitudinal energy in it, which basically, what that is, light is a wave like this, okay, and if you have a laser, it's all one wavelength that is synchronized coherently, which is like green or blue or red. That's what a laser is. And this crystal is used to create that coherence. But then what if you have light that is a point that doesn't have a wave aspect, but it's just a line? Well, now you're going in multiples of the speed of light. And it is. It is not limited to the speed of 186,000 miles per second. But that technology can and has been weaponized. Okay, so now we get to what was really at Roswell that they were experimenting with that caused two ET vehicles to run into each other. One crashed north of Roswell and just exploded in smithereens because it hit the other one when they switched the system on, because it was a fully materialized 3D object, which they are very careful not to do anymore. We'll get to this. The other one continued on a western trajectory and impacted near Socorro, and that's where the little EB, the little extraterrestrial biological entity, was retrieved that you've heard about. That did happen. So that whole cat and mouse game, or cowboys and Indians nonsense, began in the 40s. Now that's 70 years ago almost, 68 years ago, this summer. So the technologies that allow for tracking, targeting, and hitting interstellar vehicles has gone through multiple generations of refinement. And I won't bore you. We don't have enough time to go into all the information we've collected on this. But just from an operational fund of knowledge you all need to have. A man that I know who was an electronics genius had a corporation that developed a neutrino light detector. And what that is was his way of expressing when an object is not fully in the 3D, it's not fully materialized, it moves as it begins to cross from the transdimensional world, which is closely approximated to what you would call astral dream body energy. You're going to find out in a minute why they call dreamland, dreamland, out here at Area 51. that spacecraft, as it steps down, as it were, from the energy and resonant field that's transdimensional and non-materialized, releases a burst of this neutrino energy, or neutrino light, that this man, not for that purpose, for other research purposes, had invented a detector for. But in 1974, I believe it was, he was hit with a national security order, bless you, a national security order, NSO, so that technology was seized and put on all the NRO satellites, National Reconnaissance Office. So now we have a geosynchronous position satellite system that looks not only towards Earth but out into space with these detectors that can pick up an ET craft when it's stepping down out of transdimensional space, we'll discuss this, or hyperdimensional, into 3D, and then lock on it, and they will then attempt to hit it with one of these scalar longitudinal weapons, and sometimes with EMP, other kinds of electronic weapons. And so began the era of what Lynn Stringfield called the crash retrieval process, where over a period of time from the 40s up to, not that, well, still going on, where objects were on occasion, now the hit rate isn't that high, but where on occasion they would be able to target and hit these objects with these electromagnetic systems, and they would be damaged or destroyed or would crash. I have one man on my team who worked near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, and there's an underground base there. And back in the 70s, at that time, they had 9 extraterrestrial vehicles that were in storage there, and also the bodies from different species had been autopsied near Fort Huachuca, which ironically is near Tombstone, Arizona. There's some weird ironies in all of this. Now, why did I divert into all that? Because when I stepped on the stage in 1990, starting the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, using consciousness and remote viewing to contact ETs, we stepped into a hornet's nest that had been in the making already for 40 or 50 years. And what the result of that was, I was immediately contacted by people in the intelligence community, and the former head of Army Intelligence and some NSA people who said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And I said, well, I'm doing exactly what I've written I'm doing. I'm going to organize teams to be citizen diplomats to these civilizations using advanced concepts in physics and consciousness. And basically I was threatened and told I shouldn't and couldn't, and I said, watch me. This was my initiation into, so now we're 23 years into me. This was in April of 1992 when this happened to me. And I was taken to a room till 3 in the morning and given the rubber hose treatment. Basically, and I turned to this guy who was on this majority committee for intelligence, Majestic, and I said, look, I'm going to do this. I'm not rich, but I'm a doctor. I don't need your money. I died when I was 17, and I know there is no death, and death is a myth, so I'm not afraid of you. And I figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact, and there's nothing you can do about it if enough people start doing it. And he went like this and looked at me and said, well, you know exactly who this son of a bitch is? This old white-haired guy said, yeah, that's right, I am that son of a bitch. And then I said a few other choice words. Hey, I'm an emergency doctor, not, you know, a new age, whatever. So, here comes the chest tube. Nice. But, you know, and I basically said, look, I've done some research on you, and I've got some documents on you that if you get in my way, you'll be in Fort Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary for the rest of your life. So leave me alone. You know, so this is that in 92.